Driving for food delivery apps was supposed to be an easy way to make extra cash. No bosses breathing down your neck. Just pick up, drop off, and move on. I've been doing it for a couple of months in Wilmington, North Carolina, and most of my shifts were uneventful. But one night, I got an order that would make me rethink everything. It was just after midnight when the notification came in. A delivery to an address out on the outskirts of town. The instructions were strange. Drive to the end of the road, look for a house with no porch light, and wait outside. I'll come to you. It didn't sit right with me, but orders like that weren't uncommon. Some people just didn't like to deal with delivery drivers face to face. As I drove further out, the neighborhood grew quieter and darker. Streetlights became fewer and farther between, until there were none at all. My GPS directed me to a dirt path that seemed to lead to nowhere. I almost turned around, but the payout for the delivery was unusually high, and I figured it was just a rural area. When I arrived, the house was exactly as described, dark, unlit, and isolated. It was barely visible from the road, hidden behind a line of trees. I pulled up slowly, my headlights cutting through the thick night air. There were no cars in the driveway, no signs of movement, not even a porch light to welcome me. I sent a quick message to the customer. "I'm here. Where should I leave the food?" A response came almost immediately. "I'm outside." I scanned the area, my eyes darting between the house and the surrounding shadows. There was no one, no figure on the porch, no movement in the yard. Just silence, thick and unnerving. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to leave, but I didn't want to risk a bad review. "All right," I muttered to myself, opening the car door and stepping out. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling from the trees. My pulse quickened as I glanced over, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. Then, out of nowhere, they appeared. 4 men stepped into the dim glow of my headlights, their faces partially hidden by hoodies and scarves. One of them held a knife, its blade catching the faint light. "Stay where you are," one of them growled. Panic surged through me, but before I could react, they moved fast. One slashed at my tires, the hiss of air escaping cutting through the silence. Another yanked my car door open and grabbed my phone and wallet from the dashboard. I tried to run, but one of them caught me, slamming me to the ground. The world spun as they rummaged through my pockets, their voices blending into a chaotic blur. My head hit the pavement, and everything went dark. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the cold, damp air against my skin. I was lying by the side of the road, bruised and disoriented. My car was still there, its tires shredded, but the food, my phone, and my wallet were gone. A passerby must have spotted me and called for help because soon after, flashing red and blue lights filled the night. I told the police everything I could remember, but there wasn't much to go on. The men had planned it perfectly, lured me to a secluded spot, struck fast, and disappeared into the night. That was the last time I worked a night shift. Now, I stick to daytime deliveries where the streets are crowded and the risks feel a little less suffocating. But sometimes, even in broad daylight, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those shadows closing in again. It was spring, just after midnight, and I was working a late shift as a bike courier for a sandwich shop in Newark. The town was mostly quiet at that hour, the streets lit only by scattered street lights and the occasional passing car. I didn't mind the late shifts, the roads were empty, and it gave me time to think. But that night was different. That night, I learned what it meant to feel truly vulnerable. The order came in at 1:30 a.m., and the delivery address was in a quieter part of town, near the edge of a wooded area. It was one of those spots where the streetlights didn't quite reach, leaving pockets of darkness in between. I didn't think much of it, just another delivery to check off before heading home. By the time I arrived, it was around 2 a.m. I hopped off my bike and leaned it against a lamppost. Across the street, something caught my eye, a figure crouched low behind a cluster of bushes. My first thought was that it was someone drunk, maybe passed out after a late-night party. But something about the way they moved, slow, deliberate, made my skin crawl. They weren't sitting or slumped over. They were watching. I hesitated, clutching the delivery bag tighter. The house I needed was just a few steps away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure's attention was locked on me. I rang the doorbell, praying someone would answer quickly. A few moments later, A guy in his early 20s opened the door, squinting at me like I'd woken him up. I handed him the receipt to sign, but before I could say anything, I blurted out, "Hey, do you know that person across the street?" He glanced past me and shrugged. "Probably just some weirdo," he said, signing the receipt without looking again. "Right?" I muttered, trying to act like it didn't bother me. As he handed the receipt back, I noticed the figure shifting. They weren't just crouching anymore, they were standing. The dim light from a nearby lamppost caught the glint of something in their hand. My stomach dropped. It looked like a blade. I hurried back to my bike, trying to act casual, but my hands were shaking as I grabbed the handlebars. The figure moved in, fast. They bolted out from the bushes, heading straight for me. My heart exploded in panic. I jumped on my bike and pedaled as hard as I could, veering off onto the nearest path. It was an unlit bike trail that cut through a park, a risky move, but it was my only chance to lose them. The tires crunched against the gravel as I sped through the darkness, the air cold and biting against my face. I didn't dare look back. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of crickets, felt like it was them, right on my heels. The trail twisted and turned, and finally, I burst out onto a main road, my legs burning from the effort. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I was miles away from the delivery house. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold onto my bike. I scanned the area, but there was no sign of the figure. Had they given up, or were they still out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for their next chance? I never reported the incident. What could I say? That someone chased me with a possible knife? They hadn't hurt me or stolen anything. But from that night on, I refused to take late-night shifts. It wasn't worth the risk. Even now, I can't ride through dark trails without feeling that same jolt of fear. Sometimes, when I'm biking home late, I catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone crouch in the shadows, waiting to strike. It was 2009, and I was working as a pizza delivery driver to make ends meet. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills. Most nights were uneventful. Just me, my car, and the smell of pizza boxes filling the air. But one night changed everything. I got a call for a delivery out in the countryside, about 20 miles outside of town. The instructions were vague. Take the dirt road off Route 22, past the third mailbox, and follow it to the end. The directions sounded off, but it wasn't the first time I'd delivered to a rural area. I figured it was just someone living off the beaten path. As I drove out there, the paved road gave way to gravel, and then gravel turned to dirt. The night was pitch black, the only light coming from my headlights cutting through the thick woods. The deeper I went, the more my gut told me to turn around. But I needed the tip, so I kept going. Finally, I spotted it, a single house at the end of the path. It was old, almost falling apart, with its paint peeling and windows clouded over like they hadn't been cleaned in decades. My stomach churned as I parked. Something about the place felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this time or place. I grabbed the pizza and walked to the front door, which creaked open before I even knocked. A man's head peeked out, thin and pale, his eyes darting around like he was looking for someone or something. He grinned wide, too wide, and said, "Come in. I've been waiting for you." Every instinct screamed at me to stay outside, but I didn't want to be rude. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me first, a sharp, metallic odor mixed with something foul, like rotting meat. The floor was covered in large metal sheets, shiny and out of place against the dusty, antique furniture. "Randall," the man called out, his voice shrill. "Our guest is here." I froze. I didn't know who Randall was, but the way he said it sent chills down my spine. The man darted in and out of view, peeking at me from behind walls and giggling like it was some kind of game. In the background, an old phonograph played music from the 1930s, its cheerful tune completely out of place in the eerie, decaying house. Your pizza," I said, holding up the box like it was some kind of shield. He didn't take it. Instead, he kept calling for Randall, his voice growing louder and more frantic. That's when I heard it, heavy footsteps from the hallway. They were slow and deliberate, getting closer with each step. "Randall doesn't like visitors," the man whispered, his grin somehow stretching even wider. My heart was pounding as a shadow emerged from the hallway, a tall figure, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the dim light. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching me. I didn't wait to find out what Randall wanted. I dropped the pizza, bolted out the door, and didn't stop running until I was back in my car. As I peeled out of there, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them both standing in the doorway, watching me. The smaller Mun was waving, his grin still plastered across his face. I didn't report it. What would I even say? That some creepy guy with a mysterious friend tried to do what? I didn't know what their intentions were, and I didn't want to find out. All I knew was that I'd never step inside a customer's house again. Even now, I can't shake the memory of that house, the smell, the music, and Randall's silent figure in the hallway. Sometimes, when I drive down dark, empty roads, I swear I can still see that pale man grinning at me from the trees, waiting for me to deliver something I'll never understand.